Good afternoon, everyone. This is Harriet Dichter from the PDG B5 TA Center, and I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to today's session, Parent Consumer Education, PDG B5 and Childcare Working Together. I have a few housekeeping details for everyone before I turn things over to Karen Ruprecht from the State Capacity Building Center and the rest of the speakers we have for today. So let's do our housekeeping to start. Here in the Zoom room, we are asking everyone to make a quick change in your names. We're asking you to take a look at your participant and to put in for your screen name, not only your name, but the state that you're from, which we think will help facilitate the conversation. I'm sure there are many of you on the call who've been to previous sessions, but I'm quickly going to review how you should tackle this task. So first, if you can look at the participant grid, and then from there, basically on the right side of your Zoom window, hover over your name and click on the name rename button. Now type in the new display name. And as we said, what we're asking is for people to make sure that your state identification is there. A second housekeeping item, just in case anyone called in, are the instructions here about how you can change your audio if you called in on the phone and you want to use the computer audio. I'm not going to review these with people. I think we've been through these enough before in these sessions. And then my last piece before I turn things over to Karen is just to ask you to take advantage of the chat. We will have some time during today's presentation to have some open discussion, but we're thinking that as you listen to the state presenters and the experts we have today, that you may have some ideas of your own. You may have comments, you may have questions that you're going to want to get addressed. So please do use the chat throughout our entire session to make your voices heard so we can be fully responsive to you. And then, as I think we all know, we're going to ask people to mute when you are not speaking. So without further ado, I want to turn things over to Karen, who's going to kick off the content for our session today. Thank you, Karen, for joining us.
Thank you, Harriet, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, everyone. My colleague will be calling up the PowerPoint so we can go ahead and get started. We are really thrilled to be here today to talk with you on this topic of parent consumer education. As Harriet mentioned, I'm Karen Ruprecht with the Child Care State Capacity Building Center. And in my role at the Child Care State Capacity Building Center, I lead our consumer education team, of which you will meet one of my colleagues in just a few minutes, Mel Banks. But let's go ahead and advance the slide, please. Oh. Thank you. So we're going to start off with this very existential question on a Thursday afternoon about who are we? We don't want to assume that everyone on the line knows who we are at the Child Care State Capacity Building Center. So let me give you kind of a brief little overview. So the State Capacity Building Center, or SCBC as we go by, is one of the Office of Child Care funded tactical assistance centers. So we work with state and territory child care development fund leaders and their partners to create innovative early childhood systems and programs that improve results for children and families. We have various teams that provide TA to the Child Care Development Fund, or CCDF state leaders, and intermediary organizations in topics that are related to systems and capacity building, infant and toddler care, leadership, and so on and so forth. The team that I lead, the consumer education team, supports CCDF lead agencies with developing and improving consumer education and outreach activities. And also in our work, we do work with some intermediary organizations that help the lead agencies in their consumer education efforts. So we do this support through helping states enhance their consumer education websites and overall communication efforts. Can you get the next slide for me, please, Mel? Thank you. So what do we actually do in our consumer education TA? So we deliver both short and long-term TA to states that want help with some of their consumer education efforts. We've also developed a series of tools and resources to help state and territories think about their website and their communication efforts. And on the screen here, you see a couple of examples of our resources. The first one there on the left is the Digital Communications Planning Guide. And this is a really useful tool if you're working in the area of communication in your state or territory. And much of what we talk about today really is built off of this guide. The other resource is our consumer education modules. So we've developed 3 modules and they're fairly short. And we think that they would be really helpful for you if you're working in this area. And they're around areas or topics related to developing a family-friendly consumer education website. And we have 2 other modules on how you promote your consumer education website and using data to support continuous improvement efforts. So although these are geared towards consumer education websites, the topics and the strategies that are developed in there really go across if you're developing any type of family-friendly website. We've also developed some communication tools to support state efforts around the Child Care Stabilization Grants and the CCDF discretionary supplemental funds through the American Rescue Plan. So these tools include specific messages to communicate to key audiences, as well as social media posts and a host of other tools to help with partner collaboration and stakeholder engagement. So we've developed a lot of tools in our TA that I think would be helpful for these efforts as well. And if we could go to that next slide, thanks. So why are we here today? So we hope that we can share our efforts that we've used with CCDF communication best practices and to see how they translate to the PDG communication and dissemination work. In some ways, we're really communicating with very similar or the same audiences. And we feel it's important for you to know the resources available through PDG partners, such as the CCDF lead agencies, so you can coordinate some of your communication efforts. We know that time and human resources are in very short supply these days, so coordinating efforts may help in the long run. And in the end, communication best practice is the same regardless of the initiative that we're talking about. So I want to move ahead and talk about the importance of having a plan for communication and dissemination. Much like we hope that you have a strategic plan, and I know as a PDG grantee, you either have a strategic plan or you're in the process of developing a strategic plan. But strategic ongoing communication is really the key to increasing awareness and support for your work. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the key concepts that we're going to be covering here today in our panel presentation. So on the screen here, you see some of these key steps for effective communication. And I'm just going to touch upon them a little bit briefly, but as I mentioned, our panelists are going to be talking about these a little bit more in depth with Mel in just a few minutes. So it's important to remember that you really probably need different communication strategies for different activities within your work, as well as a plan for how you're going to disseminate information for the grant as a whole. So different activities may have different audiences and different levels of effort associated with them.
My apologies.
So identifying your key audience for your communication efforts is a key step. And apparently my Siri wanted to go off at that exact time. So I apologize for that. So we live in this environment, or we used to live in this environment of the old adage of, if you build it, they will come. But that no longer applies, I think, in the communication world. So for your PDG activities to have the greatest impact, you have to ensure that your target audience can access the information they need or to participate or contribute in your efforts. So you'll need to think about and consider where and how you communicate your information. Is it via a website, social media channels, webinars, peer learning groups, so on and so forth. So you'll need to really think about those communication channels. Then you'll also need to strategically think about your stakeholders and your partners and how you can leverage them to help them carry the message or disseminate information for you. So again, because time and human resources are very limited, we really need to think about our partners and stakeholders and how they can help us in these efforts. And finally, knowing what message you want to send and you want to communicate is critically important. So we'll spend some time on talking about message building as well. So with that, and with my Siri, who keeps talking to me as I'm presenting here today, I'm going to hand it over to Mel Banks, my colleague at the State Capacity Building Center, who will introduce our panelists and take us through our next section. Mel?
Thank you, Karen. So I am very excited to be able to host this panel today. When we were thinking about this session, we have a lot of materials like Karen shared that we've built and a lot of content that we would love to share with you. But what we've learned in developing these resources and working through the TA that we provide is that it was really, really helpful to think about the concepts and about the best practice through the lens of other states and the way that states have been able to implement the best practice. So what we decided to do was, instead of talking at you with a lot of best practice, was to gather together a panel of folks that are actively doing the work, along with some folks from communication, such as myself and Karen and our partner, Jake Lynn, to talk about the work that they're doing around communications. And we have states that are at all different times in the PDG cycle, right? So states that are just now standing up some communication and dissemination strategies, as well as other folks that have been doing this work for a little bit longer. So I want to take a moment to introduce our panel. I'm going to start with Andrea Camilleri, and she is the Strategic Initiatives Advisor with the PDG and Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. Andrea, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Andrea Camilleri from the state of Wisconsin, and I am happy to be here today to talk about my work. Communications oversight is one piece of what I do, as well as policy and program analysis. So, so far in our PDG journey, we are in year 2, and I have overseen a lot of outreach, such as our listening sessions, was the lead developer on our strategic plan, and am now working with our leadership team on making sure that all of the federal aid dollars that go out are kind of aligned with the different PDG programming that we have, and kind of adjusting our projects accordingly as we need to, on implementing those strategies and moving forward. And one of our next biggest phases is to be pushing a lot more grant money directly out into communities. So we're very excited about that, and you'll hear more about that later today. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, we're really excited to hear about how you've adjusted your strategies based on all the changes that are happening in the early childhood environment. So be excited to dig into that in a little bit. We also have Tennille Gary, who is joining us as the PDG Grant Manager for North Carolina's Division of Child Development and Early Education, and she is also an employee of ASI Government. Tennille, do you want to say hi?
All right. Thank you, Melissa. My name is Tennille Gary. I am the PDG Grant Manager for North Carolina. I get the pleasure of working with a great team of early childhood professionals and leaders under the direction of Dr. Christy Snuggs, who's our Division Deputy Director and PDG Project Director. In my role, I support our team in administering the preschool development grant here in North Carolina. We have over 22 activities and many more partners that we're coordinating and collaborating with to provide programs and services for our children, families, and early childhood providers who serve them. And I just wanted to highlight, we're talking about parent and consumer education. A lot of this work that we do through PDG is really built upon a lot of the efforts that my colleague, Alexandra Morris, who's our state family engagement coordinator, and also Kate Irish, who's our family and community collaboration and subject matter expert, and really connecting with our partners and providers within our communities, and really engaging our parents as leaders to inform this work. So really great to join you all today and learn from everyone here on our panel.
Thanks, Tennille. And I think, I'm really excited to hear more about how you're leveraging those partnerships specifically with parents. I think that's you're taking a really fantastic approach in your state and starting the build out of your communications with input directly from your intended audience. So I'm excited to pull some of those pieces out through our conversation. So we also have joining us Jake Lynn, who is a colleague of mine with ICF Next Government. And Jake has an extensive communications background and we'll be covering some of the best practice that are going to frame some of our conversation today. Jake, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi all, Jake Lynn. Thanks, Mel. Yeah, I'm been with ICF Next now a few years, but prior to that, worked on city and state level government in New York and here in Maryland, where I live. And prior to that, I was a journalist. So I kind of viewed message development and delivery from all different angles. And it's a real pleasure to be here today to try to share the insights and experience that I've accumulated in my time working with the city and state agencies.
Thanks, Jake. So Jake is going to take that framework that Karen introduced in the previous slide, and we're going to base our questions for the panelists around that framework. So he'll start off with a couple of pointers and best practice, and then we'll lead into some conversations for the panelists from the state. So rounding out our panel, we have Kristen Weller, who is the PDG B5 project manager for the New York State Council on Children and Families. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Kristen Weller, and I'm the project manager here at the council, is what we call it. And it's the NYS B5 project manager, and we did that on purpose, actually, because of messaging. And, you know, I'll talk about that a little in a bit. But I've been here at the council for about 5 years now. And as the project manager, you know, I just make sure that we're all rowing our boats in the same direction and able to, you know, problem solve when, you know, the rapids get a little wild, because they certainly have, and make sure everybody has a life preserver on. And before the work here, I was actually working in a home visiting program as a supervisor, and before that I was working with families and children with brain injuries. So, you know, this is a huge project. You know, over the course of 3 years, it's $40 million, and I do not have a background in business. So I feel like we're all just doing the best we can to make sure that we make a difference for children and families. So I'm happy to be here and share.
Thank you, Kristen. And in New York, one of the things I'm really excited to highlight, sorry, can you tell I'm so excited to host this panel today? There's so much good information that we have to share. But New York has a fantastic strategic plan around communication that is inclusive of paid media campaigns and targeted outreach that Kristen and her team have really put a lot of intention into. And we're going to make sure that she has a chance to share some of those pieces during the discussion today. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining today. And thank you for all of our participants for being part of this call. We really want to keep this conversation fluid and casual. So I encourage the panelists and the participants to engage with each other, use the chat to ask questions. We have a little bit of time at the end of the discussion set aside to have some Q&A, but I would much rather just take Q&A throughout the session and sprinkle in some questions as we're on a topic. And otherwise, we've got some questions that we may ask our panelists at the end of the session today. But please, please, please use the chat, ask questions. Again, our panelists are encouraged to ask questions of each other. We've got a lot of visuals to share today. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to our first topic. So I want to start with the piece on identifying your target audience. And how we're going to do this is we're going to kick off each of these topics with Jake, who's going to talk a little bit about best practice and give us some pointers. And then we'll lead from that to questions for the state panelists. So Jake, do you want to take us away with this first topic?
Sure thing, Mel. Thanks. So identifying your target audience. Nothing is really more important or sure needs to happen prior to this, because it frames and helps guide your entire movement, your entire campaign. And really, for communication to be effective, it's just integral that you understand your audience, and it'll just help you determine the most impactful and efficient method of reaching your ultimate goals. It's important to, when thinking about parents and families, for instance, as a target audience, you may need to reach a variety of, we'll call them sub-audiences, say expectant parents or families who speak a primary language other than English, or families in rural, suburban, urban areas. They all have different ways of thinking. They all have different priorities and different ways of receiving their information. And then finally, single parents or parents within blended families. And it's important to consider what information they may need. Each segment might need slightly different information and have issues that bubble up to the top differently for each other. So it's really important to do things like, say, sending out surveys, polls, focus groups, even if you have the budget for that, to really truly understand what resonates most before you put your time and energy and money into a full-fledged public awareness campaign. And communications messaging is most effective when it resonates, like I said, with your specific audiences. For example, I've been leading a campaign throughout this year with ICF Next on behalf of NIH to encourage greater vaccine uptake for COVID-19. It was a multilingual campaign. We targeted different states where we looked at the data and found out where vaccination rates were at their lowest and where there are any barriers, whether they're economic or geographic barriers to getting the vaccines. And then we shaped our campaign accordingly, whether it was through public service announcements. We just did a lot of research to find out in these regions, in these states, how did the public receive their information best? Was it through over the radio, over TV, through social media? If it was social media, which websites? Was it through mobile devices? Really trying to dig down and then apply our dollars, in that direction.
Great, thanks, Jake.
Sure.
So I think when we're thinking about how these communication strategies apply to PDG birth through 5 activities, there are a lot of different pieces that you may need to communicate on. So you may need to communicate with the population as a whole around the PDG as a whole, right? Here's what we're doing with this grant. Here are our ultimate goals, and here's the end goal. You also might have specific initiatives, so initiatives that fall within each of the activities that you need to communicate about. And really what we focused on for today's session is those activities that primarily target parents, because we know we have communication channels for, or some level of communication channels for state partners. We've got listservs, we've got established partnerships. But when it comes to targeting folks from outside the agencies, such as parents, such as the general population, it really takes an intentional approach. And one of the advantages that you have in PDG is that built-in needs assessment, right? You're already doing that research on the ground that can provide you a lot of information on how you can communicate with your intended audience. So in conversations with Tennille, I learned that North Carolina is in the process of doing an update to their needs assessment with the help of the Hunt Institute and Duke University. And so I'm wondering, Tennille, if you could talk to us a little bit about what kind of information you're getting from your needs assessment and how you're using your needs assessment to think about communicating with parents.
Sure. So just building on from last, during the PDG Birth to 5 planning grant, we completed our first needs assessment, and right now we're in the process of working with the Hunt Institute and the Duke Center for Child and Family Policy in doing a Birth to 5 needs assessment update, or we like to call it a reassessment of our early childhood system, especially given the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're working with the Hunt Institute to implement a participatory evaluation process. First, engaging a needs assessment advisory committee, which consists of members and leaders of our early childhood system, in addition to 3 parent leaders. These leaders are members of our State Family Engagement Coalition, led by my colleague, Alexandra Morris, and they've been very, very impactful in just really giving a voice from the parent perspective through this process, especially in planning and designing this needs assessment protocol to collect data from our parents, as well as our providers. So right now we're in the process of developing and finalizing our protocol to conduct focus groups with parents from across the state. Duke University is leading us through this really cool randomized selection process. They're randomly selecting the counties based on 10 regions identified for our social determinants of health in North Carolina. And then they going through and doing another subset of random selection on the populations, the different demographics of parents and families, to ensure that the data and information we collect is truly representative of North Carolina as a whole. In preparing for this focus group process, they're working with these 3 parents in reviewing the focus group protocol, the questions, the instructions, to make sure that one is designed in a way that parents understand and they can actually respond to it and collect the data that we're hoping to gather. And then another part of this process, which is really, I think is just really great in designing and engaging parents and our community, is they're working with co-facilitators to conduct the focus groups. So they're training 13 co-facilitators consisting of parents and providers who will work alongside Duke University researchers in conducting focus groups virtually with the audiences we hope to engage. So there'll be parents who are trained to work with the researchers to engage parents, and there'll be providers trained to work with the provider groups. And not only the intent was to ensure that we are following a diversity equity approach and a participatory research approach, but this also builds the capacity of our stakeholders to continue to do work to engage their stakeholders at the community level. And then thinking forward to dissemination, we actually just talked about this week in one of our planning meetings. When we completed the needs assessment update and prepared this report, how do we go about disseminating this information and making sure that it's used? And one of the first things we wanted to highlight is closing the feedback and communication loop. So we're thinking about taking the idea from our PBS&C partners is doing a pre-launch where we pull together all those stakeholders we engage through the focus group to actually present the findings of the needs assessment to them and get their initial input and thoughts. And then we're planning a dissemination plan to distribute and educate state leaders, providers, as well as parent-led groups on these findings and how they may use and incorporate this information in their planning, as well as our Birth to 5 strategic planning process. So we're really excited about this process and very excited to engage parents in this way to lead and govern this process moving forward.
I love that you mentioned kind of closing the loop, because by being able to come back with those engaged partners and say, look what you informed, look at the product that you built, that can really create some long-term trust, and it opens up an entirely new communication channel through the relationships that you've built, and can really kind of create a ripple effect in how you get information to parents and families. So thank you so much for sharing that. Andrea, I know Wisconsin is also being very intentional about your relationships with parents and kind of identifying your audience and using your target audience to inform your work. Do you want to talk to us a bit about what you're doing in Wisconsin?
Absolutely. And first, I just want to congratulate Tennille on that amazing process. I'm sitting here jotting notes, and it relates so closely to what we're doing too with our needs assessment research and whatnot. But for this question, I want to focus on Jake's point about understanding your audience and their needs, and how we can do that for the long term, even well beyond PDG. So in this graphic, you see Wisconsin's overall approach to making decisions that are informed by data and a wide range of stakeholders. And we want to do that on a wide range of topics too that affect young children and their families. So naturally, in the yellow circle at the right, you see that children and families are at the center of our system. And we are informed by the many sources over there on the left in the Wisconsin state outline. So DCF recognizes that the voices of parents or caregivers, as well as our early childhood professionals who are really out there on the front lines, are critically important to have at the table. So we're using PDG funds and have begun working in partnership to establish our state's first ever Early Childhood Equity Advisory Council. And this EAC will be designed to hear from stakeholders with lived experience from all across our state who are willing to come to that table and express their most urgent challenges and to provide insights or feedback on our different policies, our programs, and our services. So over the next few months, we'll be reaching out to potential members who are deeply embedded in the communities that we hear from the least often. We've been very careful about this selection process. We want to hear from those who are particularly vulnerable or underserved and be sure that we can reach them with appropriate communications and programs that support them. To do that effectively, we need to know their situations and hear their voices. So our state government is committed to listening to these members of the communities and being able to move, make changes to policy, program, find ways to help them the most. So we plan this to be a long-term effort, like I said. We're still in the planning and developing phases of this EAC. So as we started that process, we began to participate in shared learning activities as a team. So we wanted to enter into this to really grow our understanding of best practices of how we can authentically partner with these stakeholders, to really hear their lived experiences and be able to draw those things out in a comfortable relationship. So we're applying what we learned to finalize our vision and our mission statement for the EAC. We've also spent a lot of time exploring the data to identify those highest priority communities that we want to go into and engage with the stakeholders. And we're beginning to develop a communications plan for this project. So one final piece that's happening too, we're thinking a lot about the infrastructure that you see here on your screen and thinking about how that infrastructure is prepared at all levels to really hear these voices. And we need to solidify these collaborations that you see in the graphic and consider additional resources that may be needed at the different levels to consider systems and policy changes that might come out of this work.
That's great, Andrea. And I love that you are talking about making data-informed decisions, right? I think that's so key to this conversation. And when we're thinking about looking at your intended audience and kind of measuring who, who you're reaching out to, there's some preparation that needs to happen, right? You're looking at who's accessing services, at who needs to be served, who needs services. And then there's also kind of, are you reaching them? There's that question. So who is your intended audience? And then we'll talk a little bit later about how do you know that you're actually reaching the people that you intend to reach, and what kind of data can you use to measure those outcomes. So this is all tying together. You all, I've got an easy job today. So I do want to move on to our next topic. I could talk about all of these forever, but thank you so much, Andrea and Tennille, for sharing on that topic. I want to move on to the next, which is determining the best communication channels. So once you've identified your audience and who needs to hear your message, how do you communicate with them? And I'm going to let Jake kick us off for that one.
Thanks again, Mel. Okay, so yeah, determining the best communication channels. It's I would say the second most important step in the process after you've identified your audience. So once we determine the audience, it's important to figure out what communication channels work best for that target audience. It sounds logical, but you'd be amazed how many campaigns, both by non-government organizations or even commercial product campaigns, that just waste an extraordinary amount of time and money because they take that shotgun approach where they just think if we just send out one form of advertisement or one message across the world, it will deliver maximum value, and a lot of times it really backfires. You can oftentimes turn off folks from being too repetitive or just being completely off message. So we encourage you to consider a variety of communication channels. Diversity is key. And in this day and age, there are obviously so many more communication channels than there might have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You'll definitely need to keep, I'm sure you'll need to keep budget in mind. So it's good to think of channels that you already own that can be leveraged and maximized for optimum value. For instance, your social media channels, your YouTube channel. You know, the whole effort to communicate has become democratized more. And back in the day of the Mad Men era, you know, you really had to rely on Madison Avenue and their rates in order to play the game. And these days, it's just the world has been turned on its head, and there's so much more that non-professionals, amateurs, quote unquote, can do and to become influencers, as we all know. One of the channels though that is one that you should keep top of mind is a PDG website. For example, you could consider posting your strategic plan or guiding documents to keep stakeholders informed about how you might spend the supplemental funds, and you can use the website as a way to communicate with providers about the stabilization grants. Because one website, it's one channel, so to speak, that you can focus on and have total quality control over. If you do use a website for PDG communications, make sure you work with your website team to help place the information where users can see it. If you bury it in some fourth tier subpage, then it's an effort that's not really worth it. It needs to be on your homepage, or you need to direct people to it in an easy to remember way. So that would the best way to do that in your advertising and awareness campaign materials is to create an alias or a shortened URL, so that it's not full of wwws and .govs and you know, it's quite simple to make something that's short and easy for the public to remember. Some other channels that you could consider, there's no substitute for face-to-face communications. I know it takes more effort and time, but truly that still serves, I believe, as the most impactful way to reach parents and families. You can do that through parent advisory panels, targeted promotion through in-person events, and communicating through partners that have direct contact with families. We'll talk about that later, but it's so integral, and it's a winning solution to really get buy-in from partners who will help carry the water, so to speak, for you. And then you want to develop a plan for communicating ongoing progress on improvement initiatives funded through the PDG, so that people really believe that you're an agency or an organization that's truly making a difference. And without a doubt, use social media. It's such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. It's and anything is fair game these days. Every time a new social media platform comes around, people might smirk at it at first, and then lo and behold, a couple of years later, it's valued at $1 billion, and everyone is using it all around you. So it's smart to be an early adopter of a platform that you think can help reach maybe a niche audience that is not going to visit your website, but they're on TikTok. You have to go where your audience is rather than trying to get them to come to you. Consider using additional communication channels like newsletters, videos, webinars, informational in-person meetings, and featured resources on partner websites. We call it the COPE principle in the communications world, COPE, which stands for create once, publish everywhere. And it's just a good rule of thumb to live by, to settle on your key messages and then just explore every avenue to blanket the public with those key strategic messages. One thing that I personally live off of and really relish is media engagement. First, you want to get permission to submit an op-ed or a letter to the editor, but those are great avenues. It's a great avenue to engage with your local media to help round out their coverage of child development and keep the issues prominent local media, there's the staff cutting continues as more and more consolidation happens, and less folks are paid subscribers, unfortunately, but TV networks all have a companion website that they need to populate every day with new content, and local newspapers have less and less beat journalists that are going to cover town hall meetings, but they're always receptive to plug and play type articles whether it's an opinion piece or you're essentially sending them a pitch that they can almost write about verbatim. The barrier to entry, I would say, has been lowered simply because there are less reporters and less editors in the workforce, in the journalism workforce. So you might as well take advantage of their needs for content creation. And then finally, measure your efforts, because how do you know if you're making progress if you don't measure how you're doing? And you could do that through viewing the open rates. If you use a service like Constant Contact, which is very simple and allows you to see how many people are actually clicking and reading your newsletters, which links are they clicking on, some really fascinating metrics. Or public surveys, sending out through SurveyMonkey, lots of free services to test within your community whether they're aware and cognizant of the communication that you're disseminating. I'll hand it back over to you, Mel.
Thank you, Jake.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think when you're thinking about deciding which communication channels to pursue, it's always really helpful for me to think about how many different communication channels I engage with on a daily basis. So when I wake up in the morning and I have this horrible practice of checking my phone first thing, and I'm looking at my email, I'm looking at Facebook, I'm looking at Twitter, I'm looking at text messages with my friends and my family. I might get in the car to run an errand, not to go to work these days because I'm working from home, but and I may listen to radio or listen to a podcast on that commute. I might watch a show at night and get an ad from Hulu or Netflix or whatever streaming channel I'm watching. There are so many different ways that I'm taking in information, and my experience is unique to me. So it's really important when you're thinking about the channels that you select to communicate around your message, that you understand those habits of the folks that you're trying to reach. And things like focus groups that Andrea and Tennille highlighted earlier can be a great way to figure out how people are engaging on digital and in print platforms. So I love that exercise. I'd say run through that exercise with your focus groups if you can. You can also do some landscape scans. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can figure out what channels to use. So that being said, New York is doing some great work in this area, and they have a very strong plan around communication. And so, Kristen, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you decided what channels of communication to use in your PDG birth through 5 communications.
Sure, absolutely. From the very beginning, with the B5 application, we had to share with our federal partners what our communication plan, what our distribution plan was going to be. So I used that as my foundation to grow. The first thing I want to note is that when we started this project, we purposefully decided to call it NYS B5 because we wanted to change the message, because New York State had received PDG B5 funds prior to this, before 2018. And so people saw B5, PDG B5 in one specific way. And so we said, you know what, this is different. And so let's name it something different. So that's the first piece. Second, I wanted to lay the groundwork with our partners. So I provided all of our partners a communication chart so they would know what I would be asking of them. That, we'd be meeting every other month, we'd be meeting for an hour, that they'd have time to highlight their work. But I'm going to also ask them to please share information on my behalf, on our behalf at the council, so that way nobody would be surprised about anything. In addition, I provided them clear guidance around the messaging to make sure that we're all on the same page. So that, that was my foundation with my partners. I think it's important to acknowledge that it's one thing to share the information, it's another thing to ask people to do something with it. So that's what that foundational work did. So bottom line, I said, you know what, let me pretend I just got a $40 million business. I looked at this as a business. From the beginning, what do people need to know about this work? Who needs to know it? So I have some experience in human-centered design, and so I thought about Amazon and how easy it is to go onto Amazon and click things. I'm not a speaker for Amazon. I'm just using that as an example. It's so simple. You know what their logo looks like. It's so easy to buy things without even knowing it. And so I wanted to make sure we built a logo, again, going back to messaging and communication, built a logo that grounded us again and the partners. We're promoting equity and access to quality early childhood programs for all young children and families in New York State. So whenever anybody sees that logo, they see that tagline and they know what it's for. Next, I assessed my own committees, the councils that I'm on, the places I co-chair, the work groups I'm on, and my colleagues here at the council did the same thing. And so that's where we got this distribution plan. So the plan is to distribute information as far and wide as possible. So if I have a comm that needs to go out, it's really basic. It sort of acts like a listserv. So any conferences that we have, parent leadership opportunities, focus groups that we've been talking about, that's my basic, that's my big boom. I send it all out there. When I expect my partners to share information, I want them to know what it is they need to share. So I want them to be very clear about what this project is. My partners need to be able to talk about it just as well as I can. So that's the great big, broad brush. But if I want something to look fancy and I start to think about the different communities and folks I want to send this to, I have my newsletter. I have a constant contact newsletter. And so the newsletter requires signups. And so because of that, it's there's a consent process involved. I can't just throw anybody on there. That list has grown to close to 400 people since the grant began. And the newsletter is cool because I can link it to social media, and that's where I get to parents and community-based organizations. And so then if I go to social media now, we have interns that we've had over the past few years, as well as a small group here at the council that have a pre-planned menu of social media graphics. So every single month they say to us, this is what we're planning on distributing on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. So that way, again, we use that primarily for outreach to parents and community-based organizations. Bottom line, everything that we send out on social media, anything that I send out via the newsletter, I look at the analytics. We look at our web analytics using a couple of different programs, and I use the constant contact analytics as well to see the impact of what I'm sending out. So I hope that helps.
That's great. And I love how you're building channels, right, off of each other. So your newsletter is linked to social media. You have a distribution team, essentially. I got to see kind of what that looks like on your end. And it's basically just a spreadsheet, right? Here's your point of contact, and here are all the folks that they can reach out to. It's a really great practice to look at that, that communication or distribution list and build that as part of your communications plan. It's a simple exercise, and I think you'd be surprised by how many people and how many groups you can touch once you ask people, hey, who can you mobilize? Who can you communicate with? What listservs do you have access to? What social media do you have rights to manage and post on? And that can really grow your message. So Thank you so much for sharing that, Kristen. So I think, Andrea, you've also done some work with identifying different communication channels, and you're kind of in the more beginning stages of your media and outreach campaign planning. Do you want to share a little bit about what's happening in Wisconsin?
I'd be happy to. And yeah, Kristen mentioned her challenge of having had PDG around for a while in New York. And we have a very different challenge in Wisconsin in that this is only our second year. And our first year started just before a pandemic hit. And so that has been challenging, admittedly. But we are working to communicate more and better about the project all the time. So we did institute in our first year last year a biweekly newsletter, a website, of course, we have social media, but we want to expand this to include a broader range of content and particularly to emphasize programs that go beyond childcare. That was one of the biggest challenges we faced in the pandemic because we are housed at the grant primary recipient is housed at the Department of Children and Families, but we are also led in collaboration with our Department of Public Instruction, so public education, and our Department of Health Services, which, as you imagine, was completely consumed by the pandemic right around the time we were kicking off a lot of this work. So we had a hard time leveraging their channels, to say the least. Most of our staff over there were pulled directly into service of addressing the pandemic. And so we had some limited collaboration for a good while. However, let's put a positive spin here. We were able to pull off 2 major communication campaigns in 2020, in addition to our routine communications I already mentioned. So our first campaign was focused on thanking providers. And so we wanted to really get that message out strongly during the pandemic. But we also wanted this to have an undercurrent about this is professional work. This is not babysitting. These are educators. These are trained teachers. So we emphasize that their work in brain building, and also what was obvious at the time, that they were also essential workers who were allowing other essential workers to keep working during the pandemic, the start of it. So for that campaign, we used our website. We used social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We built a web form, which was kind of neat, where people could enter a message and an email address for any childcare provider or early care and education professional, and it would send them a custom e-card to thank them for what they were doing. So that was really, really popular and fun to put out on social media and those more playful channels. Our overall theme for PDG is around connecting the dots statewide. So it is really important that we get back to that main idea that PDG goes well beyond childcare, is shared among all the birth to 5 mixed delivery partners. And so our next campaign, our second campaign in 2020, and our next campaign that you see a little bit here on your screen, is to directly engage business and community leaders in better understanding the crisis in early care and education, and how they can help. And what also is in it for them. So how they can address their own needs for workforce recruitment, retention, and productivity by partnering with early childhood. So we've done this based on interviews and surveys of leaders and decision makers around Wisconsin, particularly in the business community. And we're really emphasizing immediate return on investment. While we could talk a lot about your future workforce 20 years from now when these kids are coming up to work for you, instead, we're really thinking about immediate action around recruitment and retention. So we have several sub audiences for this, and we invite people to take action by applying for 2 types of grants that we'll be rolling out early next year. So this draft you see on your screen is actually a web-based ad that is animated. So you first see the first panel on the left, and then it switches to the second panel, and finally the third panel, where they can click and take it to our webpage and go apply for a grant. So we're working on parallel imagery between industry and business and early care and education. We already gave feedback, in fact, on this one. So this is not going to go out because we felt that the middle image did not strongly enough represent early care and education, that it looked a little older because of the folder she's holding and everything. So, this is a work in progress, but I'm excited to hear from you, your feedback, your thoughts on how we can reach these audiences as we prepare for launch on November 1. So in that launch, we'll be using a lot of different channels, and I can talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And yeah, I love that you're being intentional and you're seeking feedback. That's so important. And it's feedback from folks that, you know, in the PDG world that have done this before, as well as feedbacks of your target audience, right? There's an opportunity there to engage parents and families in the development of materials that will reach them. So thank you so much for sharing that piece. And I'm going to keep us moving for the sake of time, because I think we've got so much good stuff to share that we're talking a lot. So I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is engaging key stakeholders and partners. This is a funny one because it's a theme through everything that we've talked about already. And it's one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to this group today, is because you all have engaged stakeholders so well in every step of your communications planning and process. So Jake, do you want to share a few best practice tips and pointers on this item?
Sure, Mel. Thanks so much. Like you said, it's instrumental. It's really not something that you can ignore to engage key stakeholders and partners. And just like you engage your audiences, you do the same with your stakeholders by providing them with a passion point and a reason for them to come on board. And whether it's, that childcare is a key conduit to increased economic development, or or that it serves another beneficial purpose community-wide. It's important to provide those different proof points, shall we say, to different stakeholders to make sure that they're all passionately engaged. Because going at it alone really muddies and dilutes the message, and it's a much greater lift than if you could get folks on your side that'll help carry the messages across the finish line or to key audiences that you need to reach. Each state and territory will need to decide who their key stakeholders and partners are for support, but it could include folks like policymakers, such as state legislators, governors, and tribal leaders and their staff, early childhood advocates, educators, early childhood professionals, business leaders for sure, like I alluded to with economic development, local chambers of commerce, and then philanthropic and faith-based organizations. They're incredibly influential on a local level and should definitely be incorporated. And even health and wellness professionals too, who can help describe the benefits that these grants can provide to overall physical and mental health among the communities that you serve. And partners can support your PDG communication efforts by sharing information with their networks, thereby extending your reach. I would definitely encourage the use of branded or syndicated content, where you write one article and disseminate it to all of your groups with full authority for them to republish it, to recirculate. You want to speak with your stakeholders and partners to determine if they might be willing to help promote the initiatives. Don't take any assumptions, that the supplemental funds will support. Research shows that people trust and follow messages much more when they're being delivered by notable names from their individual community. We did the same with that COVID vaccination campaign I mentioned earlier, by engaging local pastors, athletic coaches, teachers, and even local social media influencers. There's a lot of government communication that comes out, but the key to having it sink in is to have those messages delivered by names that people identify with and trust in their community. And then you can consider how you can collaborate effectively and help communicate a consistent message about your PDG B5 activities that will link stakeholders directly to your communications materials, like your PDG website. So you're creating this full life cycle that continues to serve itself, so that it's an operating machine, that you're putting communications on the website, that your stakeholders know where to turn, and then they are disseminating out those messages in a more effective way than you could at a government level. So that's what I have on that slide, Mel.
Great, thank you. So so your stakeholders can be a megaphone for your message, and it really, the more you engage your stakeholders and your partners and members of your intended audience, the further that message can spread. And so Tennille, you all have done something really fantastic in North Carolina with your accelerator team. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And I mean, thank you, Jake, for really highlighting the importance of engaging key stakeholders in communication and promoting our work, especially around PDG. I think for North Carolina, I mean, we're working to improve and enhance our early childhood system. And you're thinking about the consumers of our early childhood system as our parents and children and families. So back in the planning grant, Alexandra Morris, our state family engagement coordinator, partnered with the North Carolina Partnership for Children and our early childhood leaders in forming our state family engagement and leadership coalition. And this coalition consists of leaders from all across our birth to 5 mixed delivery system, including the Department of Public Instruction, Department of Health and Human Services, even and as well as philanthropic community-based organizations, early childhood providers, and most importantly, parents. Our membership consists of about 20 to 40% parent representation. And this group, although they meet more so from a governance standpoint, we have a smaller group, I won't say smaller, but a subgroup called the Accelerator Team, or as Alexandra likes to call the A Team. They meet monthly, and this group is a subset of the State Family Engagement and Leadership Coalition. Still has representation of our state birth to 5 mixed delivery system partners. We have members from Early Intervention Services, IDA Part C. We have members from the Exceptional Children Assistance Center who work with parents who of children with special needs, our local Smart Start network, Department of Social Services, just for a variety of early childhood system partners. And we have several parents who serve on this committee. And actually, this is the group that actually puts to action. Together with the State Family Engagement Leadership Coalition, they formed and developed the North Carolina's Family Engagement and Leadership Framework, which is really the foundation of how North Carolina would like to work with and engage families as leaders, as partners in building and enhancing our early childhood system. So they worked with us in helping develop that and disseminating that back in October 2020, just before North Carolina's Family Engagement Month. In November 2020, Governor Cooper proclaimed November as Family Engagement Month, and there was a variety of activities spearheaded by the Exceptional Children Assistance Center to really lift and highlight families as partners in a variety of services that serve children and families across the state. We work with our accelerator team in doing it, preparing a media messaging campaign to promote Family Engagement Month from the birth to 5 perspective. So Alexandra worked with our team in developing a Family Engagement Month calendar, highlighting a variety of activities parents can do with within their children and families to just remind them that they're their children's first teacher, and they really have a very important part of their child's learning and development. Giving some other examples of how we engage parents as stakeholders. So one of our activities for PDG is to coordinate training and technical assistance for early childhood agencies and organizations on how to best welcome families and leaders and partners in this work. So we work with our A team, including our parent leaders, in developing an RFA to identify a partner to develop this training plan, help us coordinate and host a family summit, and establish a hub to connect families to leadership opportunities within the state. So they gave us feedback in developing that RFA. We released it. We invited parents to serve as reviewers of the RFA. You see here Allison Boyd. You probably heard from her earlier this week in a conference where she co-presented with Kate and Alexandra. She served on that review committee. And so they helped us select the partner who was best, they felt that had the best proposal and approach to delivering this work in North Carolina. And then some other examples of ways we engage them as leaders. Chuck's just thinking about, we're getting ready to reconvene our family engagement and leadership coalition next week. So we've been working with our A team and an outside partner, Dispute Settlement Center, in preparing for this virtual convening. They're serving as co-facilitators of some of the breakout sessions that we're having with our state leaders. So they're really, truly partners, and we acknowledge and honor them as leaders for the work that we're doing here in North Carolina. And I think that is really all. Some other things, just kind of building back to Jake's examples of different channels of communication. Like Kristen, we have a monthly digest. We send out resources to our state family engagement leadership coalition members. We utilize the A team to share updates from all across our partners. Just the other day, one of our parent leaders in Guilford County shared some information about diversity, equity, inclusion workshop that she was sending information out about. And Allison works in Johnston County, and she asked, "What can you share that information with me?" And so it became, even our parents are helping us disseminate information so throughout our community. And I think going back to connecting the dots, Alexandra is really a great partner in just understanding all our state level organizations and coalitions and leadership opportunities and connecting parents to them. So most recently, we have the state appointed Birth to 3 Interagency Coordinating Council. Alexandra formed a family engagement work group of that council, and she has a parent who's co-leading that work group with her. In our NC State pre-K program, we have a state advisory committee, and most recently, we have a parent who's now involved in that work. So we're trying our best to get parents connected to a lot of these leadership opportunities to govern this work moving forward.
Yeah, and I love that your primary stakeholders are the folks that you're trying to reach. That makes such a big difference. I also love the use of the phrase A team for that promotion effort. That's fantastic. So there's a lot of moving parts when you're thinking about coordinating with stakeholders. And Kristen, you alluded to basically a guide or a resource that you put together to make sure that your messaging was consistent when you're pushing it out through stakeholders. Can you tell us about the NYS B5 reference guide?
Sure, I can. So we have over or close to 50 different B5 initiatives that are being funded, and over 70 partners that are connected with those initiatives. And then we also have, a group of 10 people here at the council who are in some way connected with the different initiatives. And so I developed the reference guide to, again, ground us in everything and make sure that we are all having a consistent message. But also, we have a regularly scheduled partner meeting every other month. And what's really cool is in the beginning, there was about 30 people that were part of this partner meeting. And now the invite to this meeting goes to over 80 people. People have said, "Can I be part of that? Can I hear what you're doing?" So it's really important that there be some transparency and show that even though we're working at the state level, and I don't like to say level, it's an uncomfortable word for me, but even though we're working with the state, I'm not insulated. I'm not in an insular position, and anybody can reach out and ask me a question at any time. So that was really important. But as far as the partner meeting is concerned, I only have a certain amount of time to allow the partners that we're working with to highlight the different initiatives that they're working on. And so there's no real time to deep dive into anything. And so what happens is I can share with people on every single meeting I'm a part of that we have this NYS B5 Renewal Projects Reference Guide, that I update it regularly, that I keep it on our website, and they can go there and they can look at the background of the project and what our plan is, and then have additional links and information about it and who to contact here at the council. But every single item, they can click on the partner that is leading the activity and it goes right to their website. So it also highlights the important work that our partners are doing. And so I feel like a key to the success of this is that we have from the very beginning said that we are not doing this alone, that we are doing this with all of our partners. And so I think that the partners we're working with like to be seen. They like to feel promoted. They like to feel like they're part of something that's much bigger. And I know that if I'm listening to a presentation or I read an article or a guide and my name or my initiative is mentioned in it, I'm thinking, oh, that's me, yay, so that part feels good. So it's been really useful. I encourage others to do the same. It's grounding.
Thank you so much. And I love that that is a part of your communication strategy, and it's a resource that's readily available to any of your partners. That kind of transparency, that collective effort can do a lot to build buy-in for your initiative. So thank you for sharing that. I do want to point out that what's on the screen now is just the cover, and then a sample of one area of the NYS B5. I'm trying to use your language initiative. So this is how many pages long, Kristen? I mean, it's a pretty.
It's about 50 pages long.
Yeah.
And that includes all of the links to the partners that I have in there as well. So it's a good
So it's a
document.
great, it's a comprehensive document, and I can tell a lot of hard work went into it. So thank you so much for sharing part of that with us today. All right. So we're going to move on to our next and final topic. And I think we're going to have to be brief in the rest of what we share today because we're running out of time. We're talking about so many good things. So let's, Jake, do you want to talk to us a little bit about building tailored messages? So we've identified our audience. We've talked about how we want to get messages out. And now we know what stakeholders we can use to promote that message. Now we've got to write the message, right? To back up what we're trying to talk about and to support our efforts.
That's right, Mel. If you've come this far, you don't want to drop the ball now and use language that's not going to reverberate or be remembered by your audiences. So keep it concise, keep it strong and action oriented. So instead of saying, we may, say something like we are committed to. Instead of saying I think, say we are focused on. So it's a little nuance, but it comes across like you're much more in control and you're leaning in, and that there's no gray area, that you're fully committed to making change. And you want to repeat and highlight the key information across all the messages. It may come across as a little redundant to you, a little bit patronizing to be repeating these messages over and over, but people live busy lives, and if you flood them with 9 messages when you could just give them 3 core points, then you're diluting it, the whole campaign. So it's as hard as it is, it's important to keep it as concise and consistent as possible. You want to prioritize the information you share. Again, research shows that most people only remember, like I said, up to 3 key points, and each point, each message itself should really only be about 15 to 20 words. So I know that sounds like a little bit of a PR speak, but there are some important lessons to remember, even when transmitting government based communications. And then developing tailored messages that resonate with different segments of your audiences. Although it sounds a little bit contradictory where I said to keep it brief and concise, but you can always tailor things to ever so slightly based on the demographic, on the age group, on the anything else that differentiates the types of audiences that we talked about earlier. So with that, we could lead into a little diagram, a little exercise that sometimes I utilize with my clients, called a message house. So we can move to the next slide on that. Here we have the message house. It's not a real house for sure, but it's built in the same way where the foundation, the bottom part there is some kind of overriding proof point or statistic or insight that transcends throughout your campaign, as something that's been verified, and it can serve as the overall, like I said, the foundation for everything else that you're trying to communicate. And then when you go a floor above that, then you'd have your 3 key messages that all align, but they're somewhat different. One could be from an economic development standpoint, one can be from a family continuity standpoint, but just 3 messages that showcase the benefits and the value behind the grants that you're advocating and communicating on. And then at the top is what they call the lead, the soundbite. It's just that if the public doesn't remember anything else, if they remember this one point, then that's what you'd like to have at the top. And you can think of some common campaign leads that have hung around, have stayed around, whether it's recognizing something that's that doesn't look quite right in the subway station. Say something, see something, right? It's 4 words, but it's a campaign that was launched by the government 20 years ago, and it still resonates, and it's made the public become much more engaged, and it gives them a reason to remember your outreach. And in fact, it could also be a call to action, like say something, see something, where you're asking them to lean in and to do something to help further your overall goals, as long as it's something that they themselves, the average member of the public, has the power to take on. So this type of diagram can get much more intricate, but it serves as a good starting point to keep you level set and focused on what you want to communicate to your broader constituency.
Great, thank you so much, Jake.
Sure.
And so we have 3 examples of messaging or supports to messaging that I want to get through in just the next 8 minutes. So I hate to do this to you, but I am going to ask you all to be brief in what you share. But North Carolina, Tennille, you all have a great parent engagement piece that you did in conjunction with PBS that had a lot of messaging supporting it to get the word out about it. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your campaign to promote the Roodle Block Party.
Sure. So Roodle is a PBS Kids channel. It features a variety of programming designed for children and families. And PBS-NC is our primary partner for family engagement outreach through PDG. We've been working with them since the 2019 planning grant, and we use a variety of channels to get out information, including they develop a webpage where they actually house airings of the Roodle Block Party Live at Home specials that were produced through the Preschool Development Grant, resources for families, early childhood programs and services across the state, as well as within their local communities. And then also we use, just back during the summer, we developed early learning kits to support pre-K to kindergarten transition. So they developed kits featuring a variety of resources, including books, learning materials, as well as resources about early childhood programs and services that were distributed to over 3,000 children and families participating in the NC Pre-K program. Another channel we used in supporting distribution and dissemination about Roodle is we have a variety of virtual webinars we conduct with families. One on playful learning and then the other on Bright by Text. And these are designed to engage families all across the state to learn about how they can utilize PBS-NC's resources, as well as North Carolina's early learning education resources to support their child's learning and development. So this is a picture actually here from a Roodle Block Party Live event that was held back in pre-COVID days, of course. And we actually ended up working with PBS-NC to do a similar event, but do it on TV broadcast. So you can actually click on these links here. And this past year, we featured Randolph County and Transylvania County. So they had families from those counties, leaders within those counties, early childhood providers in those counties to help really put on a fun, interactive program for children and families. We also have webinars that we've hosted, engaging families. And one of the really cool things we've seen is that 100% of the parents who are involved said that, this information has taught them something new about resources that are available to them within their community to support access to early childhood programs and services. And looking forward to next year, we're gearing to prepare an at-home learning awareness campaign and an early childhood education awareness campaign to really promote our early childhood programs and services. Here's a photo of an image that of a letter we included in our early learning kits. And we really just wanted them to, one, be aware of the resources and how they could use them to participate in learning with their children. But then also we included links to a variety of the websites and resources, PBS themed resources, as well as our Smart Start Network and childcare network. And then the last thing is Bright by Text. This is not necessarily a North Carolina specific strategy. I believe they're known nationally, but in North Carolina, we use this in support with PBSNC to send out communications to parents on a variety of resources. So they send out messaging. I just got one today about signing up your child for healthcare and health insurance, but they send out links to games, information from local providers. And it's just a great way to reach families right through their phone. So, PBSNC has been a great partner of ours, and they're an expert in communication and in media. So we're grateful to work with them.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It's always great to find partners that have that media background, that media training, but also that have access to such a broad audience. PBS and other, major communication partners, they know how to craft those targeted messages. They know what to put in a letter. So I think that there's also a lot that we can learn from communications that they put out, right? Like always beg, borrow, and steal when you can. Look at how they're messaging to parents. These are things that you can replicate in your state.
And I think going back to Jake, they're trusted. People know them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, they're a trusted partner and a great person, a group to engage with. Kristen, I want to make sure we've got time to showcase the targeted messaging that you're doing through your paid media campaign in New York.
Sure, absolutely. So when we conducted our needs assessment, we found that parents and caregivers were not clear about how to find resources. And it also showed that we needed to do better in reaching vulnerable populations that we identified in our application. So that was our directive. And so what we did is we developed this New York State parent portal, and it's at nysparenting.org, and it gives families anytime access to childcare resources, home visiting resources, developmental health resources, school attendance resources, and navigating multiple systems if you have a child with a disability. And so what we did is we connected our parent portal to our Talking is Teaching media campaign. And Talking is Teaching is a campaign that was developed by Too Small to Fail through the Clinton Foundation. And it's a campaign that is well vetted, it's nationwide, and it's free to use all of their creative. And so it's really easily replicated. They give you step-by-step instructions. And so what we did was we worked with a media company, and the media company conducted geo-targeting, which is a fancy word for mapping, using demographic data and using behavioral data, because a large part of the campaign was digital, but there's also parts of the campaign that was on like billboards and buses and just all over the subway in New York City. It was pretty cool to see. But anyway, because we wanted our campaign to be statewide, we based it on areas of high concentrations of the people that we wanted to connect with. And so it was in over 7 different languages. Since we've added 3 more languages, and we developed creative that used imagery and language to reach the target audiences, because people want to feel like you're talking to them. And so depending on the location around the state, the image and the language change depending on the user. So you can choose like to be the #1 Google search. You can have ads on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, Reddit, and use different images depending on the demographic that you want to reach. So like you're not going to put like an AARP media image on TikTok because that's not their fan base. So anyway, the easiest part is that it's so simply replicated. And what we've done now is we're working with other B5 initiatives that have seen this statewide campaign, and they're choosing to add their own messages to it. And so we've got, home visiting that wants to do their own. We've got developmental health promotion, healthy eating. It just goes on and on. This past year, and then this year moving forward, we're having families download the Parent Portal app that will then send them push notifications depending upon the age of their child. So it's pretty exciting. And just one more thing, in the first year that we did this, we had a paid TV advertisement that featured all celebrities singing Old MacDonald. And so that was just one way to really capture people's attention. So I totally encourage you to work with a media company. They know what's up. They have the tools and the resources. It's a lot of money. It's $1.5 million this year. But man, it's really well spent.
Yeah, again, pulling from those experts where you can, but I also love the example of using a campaign that's willing to share their resources, right? I mean, there are a lot of federal and national partners that are willing to share resources there. We're getting a time warning, and Andrea, I really do want to showcase what you're doing in Wisconsin. Let me go to the next slide. And if you don't mind, I think what we'll do is just put a link in the chat so people can navigate the site on their own. If you could talk us through a little bit what you're doing with the PDG sandbox in Wisconsin, just a real brief overview.
Absolutely. So we know that a needs assessment has to be like a 160-page research document. Who's going to read that, right? But we wanted to have our data that is relevant and very much needed in the field to be accessible to everyone. So we created, along with that awesome report, we created what we call the PDG sandbox. So if you click on the link in the chat, you'll see at the top of the page, there's a little bit of an image and a definition of what our needs assessment is in pretty plain terms. But really the sandbox is an invitation for people to get in, dig in that data with us and play around a bit. So once you scroll to the very, very bottom of the screen, you'll see 3 different dashboards, and those dashboards are created to allow people to interact and select which county they live in or area they live in, and then see all the different data indicators for children and families, how they're doing, as well as the different ECE programming that's available to them and different performance metrics on all of that. So I do encourage you all to just play around, take a look at the data for some different counties in Wisconsin and just see how it all plays out.
And I think this is a really great way to be transparent with the folks that are engaging with the PDG, and it kind of ties back all of your outreach and communication efforts because you can see the impact through the data, and so can your stakeholders. We are at time. I wish we could spend more time talking about all of these topics, but thank you so, so much for the great conversation today and for everyone coming to join this conversation and all the participants that joined. I'm going to hand it over to Harriet to close us out on that note. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mel, and everyone else who was able to participate in today's conversation. I put into the chat because I wanted to maximize the speaker time, a couple of other resources for everyone. So please take a look at the chat. And then you also see that we've had various resources from our speakers in here. So again, I just want to thank everyone for coming today and to our speakers for sharing so much great information about all of the terrific work that you are doing. And I'm hoping for everyone who is on the call from a PDG B5 state that you are planning to take a short break and then return for the final session, which will be starting in 30 minutes. So again, thank you so much to all of the speakers for sharing the hard work and creative work that you've been doing. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.